Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for my playthrough of a mission from Duel in the Dark. Now I'm not sure whether I'll be able to get through a complete mission, but if I can I will do so. I've got about half an hour to try and cover everything, so hopefully that'll be enough to give you at least a large chunk of this. But before I start ordering planes into the air and getting things going, just a little bit of housekeeping and preliminary details. Sorry for the camera shake. I'm having to hold my phone up because the size of this game has defeated even my tripod, as you can see. So we've got the map set up with all the various elements, the two sides aircraft, the German ground defences and the weather elements in place. Down at the bottom here we have the fuel tracker cards for the German squadrons. We have the compass cards for the British and the change of weather cards. Now, I am really, broadly speaking, going to stick to the basic rules of play for this because my intention in this video is just to show those of you who've never seen this game in action the very basic flow of play. I will mention optional rules when they become relevant. In fact, the weather cards are part of the advanced optional rule, optional rule set. I didn't feel I could leave them out because they're a really fun mechanic. But there are quite a few others, including the ability to increase the capability of the British Mosquitoes, giving one of the German fighter squadrons special fuel, and so on and so forth. But as I say, I'm going to zoom in a bit just to give you a sense of what's happening on the map. So over here, you can see the main British bomber formation and their escorting Mosquitoes are ready to go. Their target, as far as the German player is concerned, could be any one of these cities, and here's where the guessing comes in. So the sequence of setup is very important. It begins with the German player placing his fighter squadrons on any airfield that they choose, and there's airfields scattered across the board. They've got quite a choice, but significantly the squadrons are placed before a card is drawn to determine the weather. And there is a lot of potential for the Germans to get unlucky, and indeed the British too. So in the case of squadron number 2 here, they've unfortunately started off with a fair patch of ground fog over their airfield, and if they choose to take off in those conditions, that is going to cost them victory points. It represents the inevitable operational accidents involved in flying in dangerous and suboptimal conditions. So once the weather has been determined, the Germans can then place their ground defences. So they have 40 tokens altogether, the double-sided tokens, which can either be used as basic flak, searchlights or radar, or they have a special function on the reverse, in this case a fire department, which helps limit the damage a target will suffer. And so I have followed my usual tactic when I've played the Germans in this game. You can do various things. Some players like to have a thick crust of defences along the coast so that the British will pay for it whenever they cross the coast. Others favour spreading around for a defence in depth. I've got to admit I'm more of a defence in depth sort of guy. So every major city and industrial centre has a varying level of protection. You may find it odd to note that I've actually given Berlin a fairly minimal degree of protection. My reason for that is that hopefully, as the British bombers move across the board, if they pass over my other defended sectors, they will be punished by the ground defences, so that by the time they reach Berlin, it'll just be extra points. That is the theory. Of course, it depends on the caliber of the British player, because while the German is mulling over where he's going to place his ground defences, the British player, of course, is getting his cards together and programming the route of his bombers to the target. Now, Of course, this is done before the before the British player can see where the German ground defences are going to be. So there is an element of bluff there, and I think I mentioned in my previous video, being a mind reader is quite helpful. So just to have another look at the weather, I've mentioned the problems that fog causes. Ordinary clouds are both a help and a hindrance, and both sides need to watch for storm clouds, those three over there, because those can cost them victory points. And of course, the weather elements may move over the course of the game. The only other thing to note is that it is a crescent moon and the wind direction is blowing basically eastwards. So that's important for the German player because it impacts on his fuel consumption. It's less important for the British because they don't really suffer from those considerations. So without further ado, as we've theoretically set up, I'm just going to place this over the map. A word about solitairing this game. It is quite hard to solitaire it and to play both sides. The rules do allow the German player to play a solitaire game. There's a very clever setup for that, but it's not possible to solitaire it as the British. So what I'm going to do in this demonstration is I'm going to play both sides as honestly as I can. To ensure a little bit of fog of war, I set up the British course and chose the target this morning before I dashed off to work, in the hope that the pressures and other bits of the day will make me forget what I chose. So here's hoping this actually works. So in a given turn, once both sides are set up and ready to go, play begins with the movement of the British Mosquito first, then the German squadrons move, then the card is revealed showing where the British bomber formation is going. So if I remember my plan as the British, I was going to begin by having my Mosquito take off. The Mosquito can move 2 spaces regardless of what the wind is doing. I was going to keep it at low altitude, halfway up the stick, and it's going to make a beeline for that German airfield over there and bomb it. So there we go, causing problems for the Germans already. So not only are these poor fellows stuck on an airfield that's misted over, they've got British fighters bombing and strafing them to open the ball. So it's now the German turn. The question is what to do with my fighters as the German player. Well, naturally, I do want to get everybody airborne. Each time a German fighter moves conventionally, it takes 2 lines off its fuel allowance. However, if you fly into the wind, it takes an extra 1 off. If you fly with the wind, it only costs you 1 line of fuel. Now, because I've no idea as the German which direction the British bombers are going to go, I'm going to go for a fairly straightforward initial deployment, which is to have all my fighter squadrons climb to high altitude, but effectively circle over their bases. So Squadron 1 is airborne, uses up 2 fuel lines. Now, Squadron 2, I have a difficult choice here, because consulting the British Victory Board, I find that if I take off in fog when there's a Mosquito in the hex and from a bombed airfield, that gives the British 3 victory points already before anything else happens. So the question is, are the Germans willing to risk handing those 3 victory points over at the outset of the game? Now, as the victory points are balanced at 0, the German player feels he can get away with it. He wants to get as many interceptors in the air as he can, so he gives the order with some reluctance and feelings of trepidation for the safety of his pilots. So the Germans take off, and because of that combination of factors, they're taking off into the teeth of British bombing and strafing attacks, bad weather. We come over here, and the British get 3 victory points as their trade-off for German courage. So you can see the victory point counter is moving down the British side of the track. And that's the way this game works in terms of final victory in a mission. Whichever side has the victory point counter on their side at the conclusion of the mission, you can see it carries on to the German side up there. They win. No matter how many victory points you win by, there's a clear winner either way, unless it's sitting right bang on 0 when the mission ends. Now, as for the other 2 German squadrons, I'm just going to have them take off. Luckily, unlike poor Squadron 2, the others are all right. They're in ideal conditions. And so they take off and start going into their holding patterns to await orders. So that's Squadron 3. Unlike the other squadrons, which are Messerschmitts, Squadron 4 is composed of Dorniers, so you notice they have a much greater fuel endurance than the other squadrons. So the Germans are all airborne, and they've effectively conducted their movement. So it's now time for the British player to reveal where the British bomber formation is going, and that's the card that they turn over. So that means the bomber formation, which the British are going to set at high altitude, so top of the stick, is going to be heading southeast. It might be tempting for the British to head straight over, but it's nice to keep the Germans guessing. So, where to from here? It's now the turn of the Mosquito again. And what it wants to do is try to draw the Germans onto it, because that's how the British score victory points. If the Germans move onto a hex occupied by the Mosquito, the British gain points. So what the Brits are going to do is pull the Mosquito over there. Actually, no, they're not. They're going to... This is where it gets a bit tricky, because you want to fool the Germans, but you want your Mozzie to do something useful at the same time. I think I am actually going to carry on distracting the Germans. I am going to just move the Mossie over there and drop a bomb on another airfield. So far, the British are leading in victory points, so I can probably afford to lead the Germans on a merry dance as the Brits. This may prove to be a mistake, though, because the Germans, being the terribly disciplined bunch they are, and not knowing which way the bomber formation is going to go, are going to begin setting up their aerial ambushes. Now, this is going to be a little bit painful for them, because ideally they want to mass their strength along the bomber's anticipated route. So for Squadron 1, the ideal move is to go there to this neighbouring hex here, basically flying westwards. However, because they're flying into the wind, that's going to consume an awful lot of their fuel. Same dilemma for poor mauled Squadron 2 that's already taken off in very adverse conditions. But they're going to chance it because there's a good chance that they're going to be right. And so they lose a fair bit of fuel as well. Squadron 3 is probably not going to have to do the same thing. They're going to hedge their bets a bit. they're not going to spend so much fuel, and they're going to head over, whoops, they're going to head over the Ruhr. And essentially act as a bit of a reserve. And similarly, because they can't really go anywhere useful this turn, Squadron 4 is simply going to mark time over the Ruhr as well. Now, the reason they've done that is, given the direction the British bomber stream is heading, it's very possible that the Ruhr might be the target for tonight. So, good idea to concentrate your fighters above it. They're not entirely sure what the Mosquito is doing, other than the obvious, but it could be a trick to draw them off. And as it turns out, it sort of is a trick, that is. So the bombers carry on their pre-programmed course, and now we get an interception. So looking at the German player aid card, the bombers have flown into a squadron, which is 2 victory points for the Germans. There's no ground defences in that hex, and there's no adverse weather or any kind. The bombers are not at low altitude. So it's a straight 2 victory points for the Germans. So at the end of this turn, the British are still leading by 1 victory point, but their early success has been somewhat mitigated. So the question now is, what is the Mosquito going to do this time? Well, it's going to regain some altitude, and it's going to head into this hex. And it's decision time once more for the Germans. The British are the British are only either going to come this way or this way. What are they going to do to block? Squadron 1 has to be a little bit careful, because it is running low on fuel and needs to think about possible landing sites. If they nip down here, it will burn quite a lot of their fuel, but if they time it well, they'll be able to head over there when they run out and land and refuel, assuming, of course, a massive wave of British bombers isn't flattening it at the time. Maybe it's worth the risk, or maybe it's not. The British are still leading in victory points, so the Germans can't afford to give them too many. Tough choice. Maybe it might be better if Squadron 1 husbands themselves a bit. So instead of going down there, they're going to reverse course and head back that way over the coast. Because they're flying with the wind, it only costs them 1 line of fuel, so they get to stay in the air that bit longer. Squadron 2, because of where they are going to head that way to cover that angle of approach. Now, there's no particular advantage to it, so they're painfully aware that they are running low on fuel. They will get another good interception in if the bombers go that way, but they're also painfully conscious that the Mosquito, having bombed that airfield, is going to get the British more victory points if they end up landing there. And the weather is not with Germany tonight, because the other airfield in the vicinity has got fog over it. So what are Squadrons 3 and 4 going to do? It's going to hurt if they move fighters into that hex, but the Germans don't really want to allow the British bomber stream to have more uncontested travel over their airspace. So Squadron 3 is going to bite the bullet, literally, and go head on into that hex. Now, they do encounter the Mosquitoes, So a fighter squadron moving into a hex with a Mosquito gives the British a victory point, but thankfully none of the other factors come into play there, except perhaps it would have been handy if the Mozzie was still at low altitude. So the British gain another victory point for a couple of shot down Messerschmitts. They're now leading by 2 victory points. But of course, if the bombers do blunder into that space, it will be worth it. Squadron 4, they have a 50-50 chance of being right if they move into that hex. The question is, are they going to do it? They decide yes, they are. So they go into the wind and beef up Squadron 3 at a cost of gaining another victory point for the British. So now the British reveal their move, and the Germans guessed right for the most part. The British bombers alter course and head into this hex, and this is where it starts to get a bit bloody for the British. So the bomber stream has moved into a hex containing 2 fighter squadrons, so that's a total of 4 victory points for the Germans. So despite their earlier losses, at a stroke they've reversed the victory point situation. It's now Germany leading by 1 victory point. So what are the British going to do at this stage? There are some formidable defences ahead of them, and it's not yet certain whether that's the bomber target or not. It's very likely that it is from the German perspective, and almost to confirm it, the Mosquito goes in, dips to low altitude. Actually, no, it won't. There's a barrage balloon there that can interfere with its effort. So the Mosquito will actually remain at high altitude. However, significantly, and the Germans do note this, the Mosquito doesn't use its remaining bomb counters as flares for target marking. So Mosquitoes perform a double role in this game. They can suppress German defenses, but they can also mark targets, and that increases the bombers' victory point total. Significantly, the Mosquito is not dropping any flares. So what is going on? Are the British playing a coy game? Is the Ruhr actually the target, or is that bomber stream perhaps heading somewhere else? That's a difficult question the Germans are going to have to work out now. So let's go round the various squadrons. It is vaguely possible, if the British are feeling adventurous, that the bomber stream could even suddenly make a turn and head northwards and completely throw their calculations out. So just to guard against this eventuality, and also because they're a bit low on fuel, Squadron 1 is just going to mark time and be very careful with what fuel it has left. Squadron 2 is going to accept the risk of doing this, but with its very last fuel, it's going to travel with the wind and set up in a position over here, just in case the British decide it's Frankfurt that they don't like after all. At the end of the turn, Squadron 2 will have to land, and it will have to land on an airfield shrouded in fog. Now, German Squadrons 3 and 4, they both think that that has to be covered. They're going to suffer from tangling with the Mosquito, but it would be worth it if the British bombers end up steering a straight course over the Ruhr. So Squadron 3 is going to use the last of its fuel to get into position. And it does give the British another victory point. And likewise, Squadron 4 is going to do the same thing. And the British gain another victory point. So they're now leading again. And the 64 8,000 mark question is answered when the British plough on. However, no bombs are dropped. The route is probably a diversionary one, but wherever the British are heading, not a bomb is falling on the Ruhr this evening. I mean, the British player in this game would probably be wincing because, of course, he programmed the bombers' route before the German defences were placed. So that's going to sting. But anyway, not only do the Germans get points for the fighters, ouch, so a total of 4 because there's 2 squadrons, plus 1 for the radar, plus another one for the searchlight, and there are no weather elements, so that's 6 victory points to the Germans. So the Germans now have a comfortable lead of 5 points. That really hurts the British. They're going to have to do rather better in order to make up for that. Now, the next thing we do as we come back to the beginning of a new round is, what is the Mozzie going to do? The Mozzie is going to continue to make mischief. Only this time it's going to remain at high altitude. Are they leading the Germans a merry chase again, or are they actually trying to help the bomber? They haven't gone down to bomb that airfield, so one wonders. But of course the Germans now have problems of their own. Squadron 1 is going to continue its strategy of shadowing the British bomber formation from the north, but it's on its very last fuel line, so next turn it will have to hit the ground. Of course, if the British do veer north, it will be able, or I should say northeast, it will be able to intercept them. Squadron 2 has no choice. It must land and refuel. But as we noted earlier, it lands in a patch of fog. And that gives the British 1 victory point. So they're slowly getting it back. What about Squadron 3? Same thing. They ran out of fuel last turn, so they must land at the airfield in the Ruhr. It's a bit annoying for the Germans because it takes about half their fighter strength out at a fairly critical moment. The Germans are going to play the next bit a bit carefully because they have a strong suspicion that the British target might actually be Frankfurt and that mosquito is just messing with them. So Squadron 4 is going to head southeast to cover Frankfurt, just in case. But before the British move, we have to resolve a change in the weather. So drawing the card, the wind direction moves 1 bearing clockwise, and all the weather elements are blown 1 space in the new direction. So the fog moves. Good news for the British, it's moved off their airfields. I will leapfrog this one because they're both on the same line. And that bit of fog over there goes down here. So the way this works is all the weather elements move in the indicated direction down the board. If they disappear off one edge, they reappear on the opposite edge. It would remind you a little bit of the computer game Asteroids, I think, the way the clouds behave in this game. So I'll just quickly hustle all the weather elements up. Let's just leapfrog you to save a bit of time. And the same with the thunderstorms. So the wind direction has changed and all the weather elements have moved too. And now the British reveal where the bombers are going. Ah, good move, Brits. They have managed to completely fool the defences, at least for one turn. And that has slightly thrown the Germans, because where on earth are they going? Could they be going for Kassel? Could they be going for Leipzig? Are they on a long run to Berlin? Arg! So anyway, Squadron 1, completely out of position, has no choice but to land. So they come down on their German airfields. Squadron 2 is able to take off, thank goodness. But in their haste to get at the British, because they are somewhat behind them now, they have to accept that they'll be pursuing them at low altitude over Frankfurt. Squadron 3 is in a similar position. They're going to be a little bit cagey about this, because if they try and pursue the British straight away, they'll be flying in at low altitude into a hex occupied by the Mosquito, and that is not what they want at all. So they are going to try and flank the British bomber formation by heading northeast. And lastly, Squadron 4, who has been caught very badly out of position but can't do much about that now, is going to have to think about this. The great problem Squadron 4 has is if they go tearing ahead, they may not have enough fuel to get to a friendly airbase. That's very frustrating for them. And there's no airbase in the Frankfurt area. So what they're going to do is they're going to quickly nip back to the Ruhr, and they're going to voluntarily land and refuel. The British move has caught them quite badly out of position, so they're just going to have to make the best of it. They're still leading in victory points, but the last thing they want is for the British to get somewhere and drop their bombs while they're all milling around trying to get back into position or frantically refueling. So now that the German squadrons have moved, I'm sorry, I forgot to move the Mosquito. Bad, Andrew. Very, very bad. Sorry about that, everyone. Because the Germans, in theory, know exactly where the British are going, because the Mosquito flies over Leipzig and expends all of its remaining markers as target indicators. Not that that would have affected what the Germans did anyway, because they were presented with a whole host of bad choices when, contrary to expectations, the British just carried on going. And sure enough, there's the British bomber's move. So the bomber trundles over Frankfurt. Now the Germans do get some victory points because, of course, the bomber has moved into the flak zone. So the Germans get a victory point for the anti-aircraft guns, and they also get an additional victory point because there's an active searchlight there. So they've got 6. But now the British conduct their bombing run, and this is where it's going to sting for the poor Germans. So Leipzig is worth 22 victory points, plus another 4 for the target markers, so 26. It's reduced by the presence of the searchlight to 25. And there are clouds over the target which reduce it further to 20, as does the crescent moon, which makes it 17. So not quite as satisfying as the British were hoping, but 17 minus 6, which is the current German VP level, gives the British a comfortable lead of 11 victory points. So there we go. The British have finally unmasked their intentions, and Leipzig has been bombed tonight. I think, in terms of a demonstration, that's probably a good place to end this. We've demonstrated movement, we've demonstrated how the weather changes, how the aircraft interact with each other, and we've also seen the highlight of the night for the British, the moment when the bomber stream reveals its target and drops its bombs. So the rest of the mission from this point on would have been the British using their homeward bound cards in order to direct the movement of the bomber back to Britain. But I realise this video has gone on quite a bit for what was just supposed to be a demonstration. So I will stop it there, and I'll leave it on a bit of a cliffhanger, because although the British are leading by a very healthy 11 points, they still have to get all the way back to Britain. And there's a lot of German fighters in their path who'll be freshly refueled. Their route back may well take them back over some heavy concentrations of flak. They may well lose a lot of those points by the time they get back home. That would remain to be seen. But as a demonstration, I hope you found this interesting and useful and enjoyable. I certainly found it very tense, and I had largely forgotten what I'd told the bombers to do this morning, so that worked out quite well. I hope it's revealed why this game can spin quite an exciting narrative, really. And I look forward to catching up with you all when I offer my final thoughts on the game in the next video. So it just remains for me to say a huge thank you for staying with me over the course of this video. Thank you so much for watching and for tuning in. As always, I really appreciate your company, whoever you are and wherever you're watching from. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care, and thanks again. Bye.